Hey everybody, if you're like me, you're a Commander player, and all this London Mulligan nonsense, you're wondering, what is it? What does it mean? Is it good? Is it bad? Are we about to go through combo winter? What is going on? Well, let me just tell you, and let me just kind of put some of those fears to rest with this video. I want to answer some questions, clear up some misconceptions, so let's just jump right into it. Let's start off with, what is the London Mulligan? Well, normally, in the current Mulligan that we have called the Vancouver Mulligan, you'll look at your opening hand of 7 cards, and if you decide to mulligan it, you go down to 6 cards. So you'll put those, shuffle those away, draw 6 cards, and from there, if you keep 6 or fewer cards, because each time you'll mulligan, you'll go down 1. If you keep 6 or fewer cards, you'll get to scry 1. That's the second step. Instead, with the London Mulligan, we get rid of both of those 2 steps and replace it with 1 step. So instead of choosing, when you mulligan, you draw fewer cards. Instead, you'll draw 7 cards each time you mulligan. However, when you decide to keep a hand, you'll put X cards from that hand on the bottom of your library in any order, where X is the number of times that you've mulliganed. So if you keep your starting hand, the opening one, you won't have to put anything down because X equals 0. If you mulligan once, twice, 3 times, once you look at that 7 card hand, you'll choose 3 cards to put on the bottom of your library in any order. So you'll effectively have 4 cards, but those 4 cards will have been chosen from among 7. So let's talk about what the London Mulligan means, what it doesn't mean, and what the ramifications are of the London Mulligan, both in theory and in practice. So the first thing that it means is that you, as a player in the game, you will have fewer non-games where you'll either be mana screwed or mana flooded as a result of your starting hand, because it's really rough. And you've seen me do this, I think, not today, but last Monday. I had a 7 card hand, opening hand, that I couldn't keep because it had 2 lands that were both not colored lands. So I had to mulligan that away. I drew into 6 non-lands, 5 non-lands, 4 non-lands, but one of those non-lands was a 1-drop that would help me draw more cards. So I was like, I'm kind of stuck having to pick this hand. Whereas with the London Mulligan, I can avoid that. Let's say I went down to 6, and I saw that I had one land, maybe I wouldn't have kept it. But if I went down to 5 and saw that I had 2 lands, maybe there I'll be like, you know what, I can work with this. But instead, when you see 5 non-lands, that's it. You just got to go down. So instead of, just being whatever your opening hand is at chance, when you mulligan, now you get to still see the same amount of cards that you see at the beginning. So it's not any better than your opening hand. But there is a downside where you're having to get rid of some of those cards by putting them on the bottom of your library. So that's one big positive, is fewer non-games for you, the player. Secondly, it'll also mean fewer non-games for your opponents. And I'm not talking about here kind of the altruist, I want everybody to enjoy the game and have fun and be able to do stuff, which is a valid point. But for me, what I'm talking about is it gives you a higher rate of success, because if there's one of your 3 opponents in a typical 4-player multiplayer Commander game, you have one of your opponents is the scary opponent, right? Maybe they're playing Narset, maybe they're playing Marin, maybe they're playing Lord Winggrace. Whatever they're playing, something about them is scary, right? Maybe they're playing Najila, whatever. Any commander you can think of that you're afraid of, put it in that spot. Now, you have 3 opponents, meaning if someone is going to have a bad starting hand, it's only a 33% chance that it's going to be the person you want it to be. If there is someone with a bad starting hand, it's a 67% chance that it's going to be somebody else, and that's only looking at the situations where it's exactly one person has a bad starting hand, and that percentage means that you will have 1 fewer ally in taking that scary person out of the game. So with this mulligan change, now suddenly you're given more value, as long as you're not that scary player. You're given more opportunity to be able to have more allies to take out a scary opponent. So that's something that you really want to think about. Okay, now my opponents, you want to think of your opponents as resources as well. This is a little bit harder to use than life or card draw or all those other resources in the game, but your opponents are a resource, and the London Mulligan helps out you with your resource, as long as you're not the scariest person at the table. In which case, do you really need help? I don't think so. So those are what I think are 2 of the positives when it comes to this game, when it comes to this mulligan. The third and I think final positive that I can think of right now off the top of my head is the fact that the London Mulligan, in my opinion, is simpler and easier to understand than the Vancouver Mulligan. The scry one, you put it on top, put it on bottom. I know it's not too complicated, but the fact that it only works for some hands and not for other hands, and you gotta draw fewer cards, you gotta show your opponent there's so many steps where you can make a mistake. Compared to the Vancouver Mulligan, Draw 7, shuffle, draw 7, shuffle, draw 7, shuffle. You keep doing that until you find a hand that you want to keep. Then you just put X cards. So it's like it's so much quicker, not so much with the shuffling, but in terms of the number of steps. So I think it's simpler to understand. That brings me into what I think is the first downside of this mulligan change, and that is I think it's going to incentivize people to mulligan more often, which means sometimes, not often, but sometimes you'll have to wait a little bit longer to start the beginning portion of the game with the starting hands. Now, if this becomes a really big issue, there is such a simple, clean solution. I mean, it would effectively make this beginning part of the game so fast. I mean, it's the fastest we've ever been. So instead of shuffling away those 7 cards, instead you exile them face down and you keep drawing 7 cards. So by eliminating the shuffle and putting that at the very end, I think it's much better. So once you decide to keep a 7, you shuffle in all the face down exiled cards into your deck. Then put those cards on the bottom, whichever ones you don't want. Or maybe they want to do it where they put it on the bottom and then you shuffle all those away. That could even work too, where you shuffle everything in all at once. I think doing it this way would mean that no matter how many times you mulligan, you only shuffle your deck once before you draw your first 7, and then once after you're finished mulliganing, if you mulligan at all. So I feel like that would really speed it up if that becomes a problem. It's not likely, I think, in my mind, to be that big of an issue, but it has a possibility, I think. If people are really aggressively mulliganing now that they know that, okay, well, I can make sure that if I mulligan down, I'm not going to have mana issues, as long as with my normal 7-card hand, I don't have really a lot of mana issues. If that's the case, then we can see maybe it's not going to be as big of a deal. Let's talk a little bit about a few of the misconceptions behind this behind this mulligan. 1, Grenzo is going to be number 1, tier 1 commander because it can interact with the bottom of the library. I don't think this is going to be very likely. I think Grenzo does get a huge boost. Not really anything else gets as much of a boost as Grenzo does, but I don't think that boost is so big that now Grenzo is going to be like a super scary commander that you'll see at the table. I do admit, though, I could be wrong about this, but I just don't see it really impacting that much. Card advantage in your hand is very, very important. So I think the downside of being a Grenzo player that only has 5 cards at the beginning of the game, I think that means that you're not really going to have as much of an opportunity to really go crazy with the board. True, you do get to make sure that your Grenzo activations will find what you want and you'll know what's on the bottom of your library, but I just don't think it's going to be that advantageous that it's worth having fewer cards in hand. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong. We'll see how it plays out, though. I think the second downside behind the London Mulligan is that people are, or rather the second misconception, is that people are thinking that, this is going to make combo decks like Narset and Brago, stuff like that. They're going to make them super consistent, and now we're about to enter into combo winter, right? That's what a lot of people say. I don't see that happening. And the reason that I don't see that happening is, let's say someone mulligans down to 4, right? They're only keeping 4 cards in hand. By mulliganing down to 4 with the London Mulligan versus mulliganing down to 4 with the Vancouver Mulligan, you're only seeing a difference of 3 cards out of your deck. How crazy is a free, let's say, draw 3, exile 3 from your hand? Is it that big of a deal? Is it going to help combo decks that are keeping 4 cards in the hand that much that they would prefer to go down to that? I doubt it. I really doubt it. We might see combo decks get a little bit of a boost, but I don't think it's going to be bigger than, let's say, a tutor would, because a tutor can let you find anything of the whole deck, right? It's not just helping you find more cards in your opening hand. I mean, it can cost as little as 1 mana, tutor for anything. I don't really see people talking about that one as much. So if London Mulligan is helping combo decks too much, I think let's tackle the first problem, which is tutors. I think that's a bigger issue than this mulligan could ever be for a combo deck. So that's, I think, the second misconception. And the third misconception is that the London Mulligan is basically partial Paris. And here's why I think that's not the case. With partial Paris, you were able to sculpt your hand, meaning you were able to get rid of cards that you don't want and gain cards that you do want. With the London Mulligan, you can't do that. And the reason that you can't sculpt your hand is you can only get rid of cards that you don't want. You can't replace them with cards that you might potentially want. The only way that you can do that is by mulliganing all 7 cards. So let's say you look at 7 cards, you see 1 card you want to keep, but the other 6 you don't want to keep. You either get to keep that 1 card or get rid of everything. You can't do both. So I think because of that, the partial Paris is not exactly like the London Mulligan. I think London Mulligan is much, much better. And that's pretty much all I have to say. Now, again, this is based on my own looking at it through my perspective of how I've played Commander games. But in addition to that, it's also me talking about my experience with it. Because for I think about a month on Magic Online, every Commander player played with the London Mulligan. And based on that, what I experienced, it wasn't a big deal. There wasn't a huge uptick in combo decks. There wasn't a huge uptick in Grenzo decks. Games felt actually a lot more fun, right? There were fewer non-games for me, fewer non-games for my opponents. It just felt a lot better. So again, in theory and in practice, I've experienced that this Mulligan change is actually pretty good for the game. There's not really anything wrong with it. But if you disagree with me, or if you agree with me, let me know your perspective. I'm sure I would get a huge benefit from hearing someone else's side of the story, and I'm sure everybody watching this video, same thing. So if you want to leave a comment, feel free to do that on this video. If you want to look at other people, what other people think, feel free to look down in the comments and reply to other people. I know I will be. Talking with people in the comments is something I love to do. So thank you so much for watching this video. I'm really interested to hear what you think as well. And until next time, peace.